We've got a great presentation today by Dale Furtwängler on pricing, a whole new way of looking at pricing instead of seeing what your competitors are paying or charging. So for those of you who are new, welcome. We appreciate it. For those of you who are coming back again, it's nice to see all of you again. We really appreciate you being here. So just a little history on Midwest Manufacturing Leaders. This is a repeat for some of you. We started about 3 years ago on LinkedIn Online and got a group going there with the help of Ben and his company. If you ever need any LinkedIn help, these guys are awesome. But we've gotten to about 5,500 members online now, so we're in the top 1% of all LinkedIn groups. And about 18 months ago, we decided to start hosting these events so that we could get people together. So today is our 1-year anniversary of the event. So I know some of you were there about a year ago. So it was at the Queenie Park Recreation Center, and Joe Reagan kicked it off. And we were looking for a real big pep talk about manufacturing, and Joe kind of gave us some stats on what was going on in the industry in St. Louis and everything along those lines. So great events and 1-year anniversary. We appreciate that. So just to talk a little bit about Dale, Dale Furtwängler helps business leaders and their organizations free themselves of fear, anxiety, and frustration, key elements in helping them enjoy premium prices. Without exception, Dale's clients tell him that the clarity they've gained about who their ideal customer is, what it is that they value, and how much they value it, gives them the confidence they need to get premium prices. They also say that they've never had more fun doing business. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dale and we'll get things rolling. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks, Tom. And I want to invite all of you to stop me at any point, ask questions, challenge my thinking, share your experiences. But one of the things I can assure you is that the collective wisdom in this room is much greater than mine. So by sharing your experiences, we'll all learn a lot more that way. When I had the good fortune to have my book Pricing for Profit published, I rebranded my business away from CFO services to pricing, which is something I've been doing as part of that all along. And when I did that, I created a brand promise, a promise that I was making to prospects and clients that would help them get higher prices regardless of what their competitors or the economy is doing. And I got to tell you, that raised a few eyebrows, more than a few. And a longtime friend of mine, he said, Dale, when he heard this title, I said, Dale, I've been amazed by some of the things you've accomplished over the years, but I got to tell you, I'm having a hard time buying into this one. And I asked myself, what is it that makes this seem so incredible? What is it that makes us as business people so dubious about the fact that we can get premium prices in good times and bad? And I think I traced the answer to that to the price elasticity concept. Now, some of you have had that in college in your economics courses. Some of you have just picked it up through conversations with other business people. But basically what the price elasticity concept says is that all other things being equal, if you lower your price, you're going to increase the unit volume sales, right? Are you agree? And most companies using price elasticity are looking at this part of the curve and they're trying to decide which price on that part of the curve to use that's going to optimize both their revenues and their profits. What I'm going to suggest to you is that's the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, how do we get on the vertical part of the curve and make price irrelevant? How do we make price irrelevant? Now, what kind of pushback do you think I get when I make that suggestion to business people? What do you think their objection is to that?
What about competition?
What about competition? That's one of them.
The market won't bear it.
I'm sorry?
The market won't bear it.
The market won't bear it. That's another. The other one I get is the volume's low. If you're on the vertical part of the curve, you're not going to be selling much. And that's the biggest argument that I get, the most frequent argument I get. And I question that. Is that really true? And in order to make that determination, I explored 4 companies, 2 with premium price strategies, 2 with low price strategies. And before I tell you who these companies are, let's take a look at the economy for the time period that I chose. And I intentionally chose the period from 2009 to 2012. Why do you think I chose that time period? In the recession, right? So we're in the heart of the recession. I didn't include 2008 because during 2008, even the big name brands like Kraft Foods, Procter & Gamble, Colgate, they were sitting on their hands in terms of pricing. They were waiting to see what consumers were going to do before they did anything with the pricing. So I excluded 2008 for that reason. I looked at 2009 to 2012 because of the economy. And one of the things that I wanted to do now is to refresh our memories about what the economy was really like during this time period. If you recall, the economist said that the recession ended in June 2009. In early 2010, the stock market started to rebound, and most people's 401ks and home values were still in the tank. Unemployment was still around 8.8%. And we were getting bombarded almost daily with possible defaults in Europe, right? The question about whether the European Union was going to remain valid or viable, and whether the euro was going to be viable. This is the kind of environment we were in at this point in time. So if there was ever an economy that we would expect to favor companies with a low price strategy, this would be it, wouldn't it? Okay, let's see what happens. The 4 companies that I chose were Apple, Panera, Amazon, and Walmart. 2 premium price companies, 2 low price companies. Let's see what the results were like during this time period. Apple led the pack. Compound annual growth rate in revenues of 44.3%. And the operating margins, the profit after their operating costs, their overhead, grew by 63%. Now this is a company that's selling something nobody needs in the worst recession nobody needs. And yet they produced the highest growth rate in revenues, highest growth rate in operating margin. So does the economy really matter? The second company, the company that did the next best in terms of revenue growth rate was Amazon, 26.3%, very impressive growth rate, until you look at the fact that they gave up 30% of their operating margin in order to achieve that goal. I'm not sure if that's what you want for your business, but I know it's certainly not what I'll be far in mine. The third, in terms of revenue growth, was Panera, 10.7%, and they had a 14% improvement in their operating margins. And what isn't obvious from these numbers is that Panera was one of the few companies that consistently raised prices throughout the recession. And again, it's a company that's providing something nobody needs. Didn't have to eat out during the recession, right? And especially at places charging premium prices for food. And yet they're experiencing this kind of growth, consistently raising prices and growing their profits as well. The company that came in dead last of these 4 was Walmart at 3.5%. Now, in fairness to Walmart, they've got a much higher base that they're operating from, right? But again, what isn't obvious from these numbers is that during this time period, Walmart experienced 9 consecutive quarters of declining sales in the U.S. 9 consecutive quarters. In the 10th quarter, when they turned that around and started growing revenues again, they gave up 2.3% of their operating margin, which is almost 10% of their gross margin. That's a lot to give up to resume revenue growth. So I know that we're only looking at 4 the companies here, and this is not necessarily a compelling argument for my position that premium price strategies are a lot more effective. So let's do a little exercise right now, and I want you to, at your table, work together, and within 30 seconds, I'll time it for you. Within 30 seconds, create a list of the companies that you can think of that have premium price strategies that have been around for a century or more. Okay? We'll start now. Who'd like to share what they came up with at their table?
Well, we didn't know all of these for 100 years, but we listed Rolls-Royce, BMW, Mercedes.
I think we actually mentioned some of the same ones.
Anybody else have any different?
We got those Ski, Cartier, Ferrari, Porsche.
Okay. Any others?
We got Neiman Marcus and Domain on.
Good. Darking construction? Good. Yeah. Yeah, I did that exercise, and this is the list I came up with. And then I went back and researched just to make sure that they hadn't, in fact, been in business for more than 100 years. Okay? Okay, now we're going to do another exercise. Same thing, 30 seconds, work together at your table, and come up with a list of names of low price strategy companies that have been around for 100 years or more. Okay, who would like to share their list with us this time? Anyone care to share their list with us?
We only get a few, Sears, Marshall Field, and Constantine.
AB?
And how
Okay. Has Anheuser-Busch historically been a low price company? Yeah, what was the other two?
Sears and Marshall.
Sears? Okay. And
Marshall Field.
Marshall Field? Okay, good. You did better than I did. But, yeah, you did better than I did, because I couldn't come up with that. So we had, what, a couple of dozen companies that are been successful for 100 years or more with premium price strategies, and a couple that have been around that long with low price strategy. And my point is that, you know, it's possible to get premium prices and still experience tremendous growth and long-term growth and success. And let's face it, these companies that have been around for 100 years or more have gone through an awful lot of recessions, haven't they? It wasn't just this last one. And they went through the Great Depression and still with premium prices managed to thrive and survive through all of those. So if we've got this data that tells us that premium price strategies don't do what normally we expect, then why is it that we believe this? And again, I think the answer to that is that we have faulty memories. And the only thing we remember from the price elasticity concept is that if you lower your price, your sales go up. And what we forget is the qualifying phrase at the beginning, all other things being equal. All other things being equal. And isn't it our job to make sure that all other things aren't equal? Isn't that our responsibility? Isn't it in our best interest to tilt the playing field so that it's tilted in our favor? Isn't that our roles? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So that little oversight, that one little qualifying phrase, forgetting it, doesn't let us think as well as we could in terms of how are we going to tilt the field in our favor? How are we going to position ourselves, our products, our offerings in a way that allows us to get premium prices, good times and bad?
Well, this is mostly perception, because, I mean, Microsoft tried to sell its Windows operating system first for $50, you couldn't do it. And then they raised it to $250 and $3,000. It must be something that they just do that a lot.
Right. And for those of you who might not have heard that, it said, well, Microsoft's a great example of that. They started off offering their operating system for $50 and didn't enjoy much success at all. And when they raised it to $250, sales took off like crazy. And yes, it is perception. The perception is that, you know, the low price is low quality, right? High price is high quality. That's the perception we have. Whether that's real or not is a whole other question. And I'll give you an example. I was interviewed by a gentleman one day, and we were talking about this very point, this perception. And we were talking about main brands. And he said, well, the quality's better. I said, well, that may be the case, but not necessarily. But the perception is there. And he hesitated a moment. He said, you know, you're right. He said, I love polo shirts. He said, I'll continue to buy polo shirts, but now that you mention that, I remember that the collars and the cuffs and the frame were quickly on those than the shirts that I buy for just not the right amounts. So it really wasn't a better quality. What he was buying for was image enhancement. Any questions about that? Yes.
So do some businesses require though, a low price period in their history in order to gain a foothold in the marketplace? I mean, do you have to pass through a low price period?
No, you really don't. Again, you create perception with the pricing that you do. And if you're willing to go in with a low price, you look hungry for the business, first of all. And number one, people don't like to do business with people who are hungry. We like to do business with people who are confident and in their own value and are able to communicate that value effectively, and if it's value we want them to pay for it. So when you start out with a low price, then number one, you create that perception, and number two, it's much more difficult to raise the price later on. Because then people feel like they're being gouged. You know, one of the things that creates this problem of not being able to distinguish ourselves effectively is that we have a misconception about what it is that we're selling. If I were to ask most of you what it is that you would sell, you would tell me some product or service that your company offers, right? Is that fair? The reality is there are only three things that any of us buy: image, innovation, and time savings. That's it. You can take any benefit that any company claims to provide, and it's going to fall into one of those three categories. And if we don't realize that that's what the customers are buying, and we're not communicating in terms of what interests them, then we're missing the boat. And our offerings, whether it's products or services or some combination too, is going to look like everybody else that buys that product or service. But when we reframe that in the context of either image, innovation, or time saving, then it takes on a whole new view, a whole new vantage point in the customer's eyes, and it's easier for them to see the value. And different people can be buying the same thing for different reasons. There were people who were buying Apple's products, waiting in line overnight, in the worst recession in 7 decades, to pay premium prices to get this, right? These are the people that love innovation. And they don't care what kind of problems are associated with it. They love to be on the cutting edge, and they even enjoy regaling people with all the challenges, all the struggles they have using that new technology, right? Whatever that innovation was. There are other people who bought those who might have been standing in line, not because they really valued the technology and the innovation that greatly, but because they wanted the perception, the image of being on the cutting edge. And there were probably a few that saw some time-saving advantages as well for them in that whole process. If I do this, it's going to save me time here, there, or somewhere else. So again, different people buy for different reasons, and one of the things that we have to identify when we're talking to prospects is which of those three is really important to them, most important to them, and then reframe our presentation in the context of that. And when we do that, then we're speaking their language, the value is more obvious to them, and so easier to get the premium prices. Make sense? Any questions? Another thing that gets in the way of getting premium prices, really, in doing this pricing work, what I discovered is there are 5 elements that are critical to getting premium prices. One is a clear brand promise. A clear brand promise. And the way I define it is the result. What result is your customer going to get from using your product or service? Now, unfortunately, when we're asked what we do, we tell people what we do. That's not what the customer cares about. The customer cares about the result they're going to get. So one of the keys is making sure that when you're communicating the value result. The second element is a psychographic profile of your ideal customer. And a psychographic profile is one that looks at the values, the behaviors, the characteristics of the customer who's buying. Especially those who are paying premium prices to get what you're offering. You know, most businesses, when they define their ideal customer, use demographics. And demographics are accurate, but they don't really give the whole picture. And the way I like to describe it is demographics get you to the stadium, psychographics get you to your seat. So if you have a psychographic profile, you're going to be a lot more effective in both marketing and sales. And you know, to help you visualize what this looks like, imagine for a moment that you own a Mercedes dealership. And you know that all of your customers have six-figure incomes and they live in certain zip codes. Those are the demographics and they're accurate, right? But what demographics doesn't explain is why there are people in those zip codes making six-figure incomes who are buying Hummers, Audis, BMWs, and Lexus. Right? Until we get to that, we're going to spend a lot of time, energy, and money in marketing and in our sales efforts. And I'll give you an example from my business. Years ago, I had a leadership program that I was promoting. And I had gotten some phenomenal results when I was in corporate using this system. One of my clients, when I coached them on this system, cut their billing cycle from 3 weeks to 2 days within a month. So I had some pretty impressive results to go to the market with, and I got a ton of interest. But my close rate was abysmal. And I kept wondering, who wouldn't want results like this? Why am I not closing more business? And it wasn't until I got serious about answering that question and really gave it some serious consideration that I realized there were 3 types of managers. There are autocrats that view their employees as automatons. You key the instructions, flip a switch, and they very well do what they're told. There are paternalists who, for some reason, feel a responsibility to provide employment to people who are not necessarily top tier, and consequently, they don't expect a lot of them. And the third type of manager is what I call an engagement manager, that like to engage their employees and identify new opportunities, streamlining processes, and solving problems. My program is designed for the third group. And I realized I was spending too much time talking to the first 2 groups. So that enabled me then to change my marketing message. And instead of saying, if you want results like this, give me a call, and everybody wanted results like I was telling. I said, if you're the kind of manager that likes to engage your employees, blah, 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 and you want these kind of results, give me a call. I got far fewer calls, but my close rate went through the ceiling. Because the people that called already knew that that leadership style worked for them. I didn't have to educate them, I didn't have to convince them it was going to work. They knew it was going to work. But they realized that they weren't getting the magnitude of results that I've been getting, and that's what they wanted. So the sale was virtually made when I got that phone call. So I spent a lot of dollars in marketing, and my marketing message was more clear, and I could target it a lot more effectively. And I spent a lot less time and energy in sales efforts. Huge difference. Why? Because I had a psychographic profile. I knew what the values and behaviors and characteristics of those leaders were, and I could tailor all my messaging to that. So when you got those first 2 elements, a clear breakdown, the result that you're going to provide that your customers can expect to get from working with you, whether it's using your product or service or some combination of the 2, and you've got the psychographic profile of who your ideal customer is, the other 3 elements are just kind of natural byproducts. One being the marketing message, as I just cited in my example. It was much easier and I was much more effective at communicating my value because I knew who I was targeting, I knew who I was speaking to, I knew I had that psychographic profile. same messaging in my sales script, and it was easier for me to quantify the value, the benefits that the customer is going to get. And my CPA background admittedly helped me in that regard. You know, so it was easy for me to take benefits and convert them to dollars and cents value. And the way I would do that is I would lead the prospect through a series of questions that allow them to do the math with me, so that I wasn't telling them what the value would be, but they were part of calculating what that value was and being able to then trust the numbers that we were coming out with. The other thing it did in the sales arena is it allowed me to qualify prospects a lot more quickly. So when I got a phone call for that leadership program, and no salesperson with their soul would do this, but I could qualify a prospect with one question. Now, I always ask follow-up questions just to confirm my first impression, but I have to say that I have a 95% confidence level in this one question as a qualifier. If somebody called me about that leadership program, I'd ask them, if you were faced with this situation with an employee, how would you handle it? And all the grads would say, well, I tell them you do this, that, something else. Paternalists would say, well, we'll give them some coaching, we'll give them some mentoring, and I'm not opposed to those things, so don't misunderstand me. Or maybe we'll shift the workload or something. They were always looking for a workaround. But they were determining what the solution was. They weren't engaging the employee in helping find the solution. And then the engagement manager said, oh, we sit down and talk about it. So with that one question, I could determine whether or not the person I was speaking to was going to be a viable prospect. And if they weren't, it was real easy for me to say, look, I'm not the right solution for you. Well, why not? Because this is your natural style, this is your natural approach. This is my approach, and this is the one that I'm consulting with people on and helping them get better at. So in essence, I'd be asking you to change your natural style. Realistically, we don't do that very well. I don't do it well. So it's just not going to work. It's not going to be a good investment for you. We're not going to enjoy success. In fact, we'll probably aggravate one another. So it just doesn't make sense for us to move forward. The other thing that I did in the sales calls is that with that psychographic profile, I would tell the prospect what that was. And the way I would do that is I would say to them, you know, where my clients and I enjoy the greatest success is when they possess these characteristics. And I would tell them what they were. In about 20% of the cases, the prospect would ask me if they qualify. Now you talk about changing the dynamic of the sales call, you know, that did it. And even the other 80% that didn't ask knew at that point that this wasn't a unilateral decision to be made by them, that we were going to collaborate in deciding whether or not to move forward. And that put the relationship from the very beginning on a peer level. Okay, I'm not serving you. We're working together to provide a solution to whatever it is that you want. And so it laid the foundation for a very strong, long-term mutually beneficial relationship. So a lot of advantages that come from this. And then the fifth element was actually bundling and pricing. And that's the easy part. You know, once you've got the the sociologists say there's a law of reciprocity. So if somebody does something good for us, we want to do something good for them in return. Well, if you made a concession to your prospect to help them with their budget, then they feel more compelled to make a concession to you. The other thing that I think is actually more powerful, at least in my mind, is that when I do that, when I go to that next alternative, when I say to the prospect, yes, we can come up with an option, and here's an alternative for you, and the investment's much smaller. Here's what you're giving up. Because the reality is none of us wants to give up anything, right? We want that whole package, we just want it at a cheaper price. And by saying that, what I'm encouraging them to do, almost forcing them to do, is to reevaluate that decision that is too expensive, that the ideal is too expensive. And it forces them to make a more conscious decision about whether or not what they're giving up is worth giving up to save that amount of money. And the interesting thing is when people are making conscious decisions, they're happier with those decisions. All too often what happens is when we're not asking them to think more consciously about the alternatives, they're making some kind of emotional judgment. It's not well thought out. It's just a gut feel. They're never certain whether or not that's the right choice. When you ask them to make that conscious determination, and they do, they're typically happier with their decision. So the reason that I found that a lot of companies don't get premium prices for their products and services is that of those five, the brand promise, the psychographic profile, more effective marketing, quantifying the value of the sales scripts, and then the price per month, one or more of those five are missing, or they're not congruent. And when they're not congruent, or they're missing, then you confuse the prospect. And as soon as they get confused, price becomes the determining factor in making the purchase. Okay? So those are the five elements that you need in order to get premium pricing. Questions? Yes, sir.
It may apply just to larger companies, but isn't it the brand? I mean, if you look at, you say Nordstrom's, they've got Nordstrom Rack for that price point. If you look at Audi, Bentley, Porsche, they've got Volkswagen at that price. Isn't it more about the brand than the company, where you create a brand at a value level? But within that corporate entity, you've got price points that feed off that main brand.
Right.
They get the reputation at a lower price point.
Right. Did everybody hear that? Okay. So what he's saying is that, asking you, isn't it all about the brand? So if you have a brand like Nordstrom's, or what was the other company?
Well,
Or BMW, was it? Or no, Mercedes?
Porsche, Bentley, Audi,
Okay.
Volkswagen.
Okay. So, with some of the car companies, you've got these strong brands at premium prices, and yet they begin to offer alternatives at lower prices, the racks for Nordstrom's or the other vehicles. But one of the keys there is they started out with a premium brand, right? Now, having said that, there is a danger in coming up with a lower price point for a different brand, for a lower price market, because it can, remember, people are buying image innovation timesaving. If it diminishes the image of your brand, it can cost you customers. I remember talking to a gentleman a few years ago, and he said, I almost stopped buying Mercedes when they came out with the C-Class. So what was he really saying? That he felt the image was diminished because So it's possible to do that, but there's some risk associated with it. And you have to be very careful with it about how you do that. One of the reasons that I think the Daimler-Chrysler merger failed is you've got two completely different markets there. And the financial press, when they were talking about that merger, were focusing on the financial savings, the cost savings that were associated with that. My question is, what's the customer going to gain from that relationship? And I couldn't see anything obvious from that. It's one of the reasons I sold my Chrysler stock at that point. Now, I admit I got out just a few months too early, but I was glad I got out when I did, because I didn't see any improvement in value to the customer. So if there isn't something in there for the customer, then there's no point in doing it. Later on, people said, well, you know, Daimler wanted some of the design capabilities that Chrysler had. Because Chrysler had developed a process for developing prototypes and getting to market in about 18 months with new designs. Well, you know, if that's what you want, why not just create a joint venture for the design components? Why merge two companies that are serving two completely different markets? The Mercedes customers didn't want Chrysler customers in their showroom, or vice versa. You know, completely different images, completely different perceptions. So yeah, it's possible to do that, but the keys are, number one, go in with a premium price strategy to begin with, and then you can offer lower priced alternatives. But be careful how far down you go. Be careful how far down you go, because you can dramatically diminish the perception of value in that brand. Other questions? No? Well, if you don't have any other questions, I think we'll wrap it up at this point. Give you some more time to yes. Okay, there's the brand promise, which is a result. Communicate the result the customer's going to get. The psychographic profile of the ideal customer, which is a profile which highlights the values and behaviors and characteristics of that buyer. Marketing messages that speak to that, to those values and behaviors and characteristics. The sales scripts that quantify the value of the benefits. In other words, convert benefits into dollars and cents value, because most customers can't do that on their own. Unfortunately, ultimately, salespeople can't do that on their own either. And number five, bundling pricing. Creating options and knowing how to present the options in ways that increase the average ticket sales. Okay. Any other questions? With that, thank you all very much for coming.